sounded like that all the workforce has access to the policy if they're looking for it. That's not really the same thing as actively ensuring, as the employer, that everyone is fully aware of the whistleblowing policy and how it operates. So it's not so much, I understand that everyone can have access to it if they believe they're looking for it. I don't have any reason to believe there is a problem with this, but I do think it's important that the workforce is fully aware of whistleblowing where it's necessary, and that's for a variety of reasons, as much as anything, to ensure that there aren't any possible accusations of people didn't know, or for some reason or other, the council might be trying to avoid making sure that people have the opportunity. I don't believe those are issues. I have no reason to believe that. But one way of ensuring that none of these become issues is to ensure that we have an active program of engaging with the workforce to make sure they are aware. So I wonder if you could possibly just reply to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I fully understand your concerns. And part of the reason for introducing Page Tiger as our new platform is to address those concerns so that all of our employment-related policies and guidance are available to all of our colleagues. I think taking your points on board, we do a lot of promotion of updated and reviewed policies and guidance as and when that happens. And as I say, a lot of promotion around Page Tiger as our newly launched platform. But perhaps what I'll do is I'll take away following your comments today and look whether there's anything further that we need to do in terms of promoting whistleblowing policy and guidance specifically to existing colleagues. I think from my perspective, the fact that we've had 2 cases in the past 12 months over the time period I referred to, and we've seen 5 cases in the past 5 years across a variety of different directorates, doesn't give me any cause for concern that colleagues aren't aware of the whistleblowing policy or how to follow that and to access that. But from my point of view, we can definitely go away and see if there's more we can do, especially with the upcoming review. I don't know whether any other colleagues want to come in.
So thank you, Philip.
Well, just not to prolong that, but thank you. And it would be helpful, I think, if we were able to be assured that there is the active promotion by our MCC as the employer. I don't think that is sound logic to say that because we've got so few whistleblowing cases, that means, or we should conclude, that there doesn't appear to be a problem. Other people, I'm not concluding this, but other people might conclude that, well, that's because a great many of the workforce may not be aware of it. So it's for the avoidance of that. Thank you.
If I could just respond, I know colleagues are waiting to come up. If I just respond, I just wanted to add, looking across local authorities, 5 over a 5-year period isn't regarded as few. That probably is comparable with what other organisations see. Just wanted to add that. It seems a low number, but thankfully across our organisations in Wales, it's not a high comparison.
Thank you. So colleagues do want to comment. So if I go to Matt Gatehouse first, please. Matt.
Thank you, Chair. And for the benefit of those watching at home, Matt Gatehouse, Chief Officer, People, Performance and Partnership. And thanks. As Pip has mentioned, Councillor Neil, thanks very much for the feedback. It is absolutely important we look at this. And I would like to stress, I think Pip has said it very clearly, but this work that has been done is to help make sure, and sorry, let me just be clear, the product of Page Tiger, if you're not familiar with it, it means all of those frontline colleagues that may be in occupations like home care or frontline waste that may not be sat in front of a laptop where they're fed the usual sort of messages when we open up and we see our home screen. That means they can access all of these documents securely over their own devices. And what we need to do now, that product's been launched recently, this sort of portfolio of policies is out there, is to back that up with things like QR codes around the buildings and just that continuous message so people know when those policies are changed, so they can click on a QR code, see the latest version of things. And we know that we need to do more to continually drip that out, but the work that Pip and her team have done has given us all of the necessary technology building blocks to make sure that we can build on the work we've done to date and make sure that all of our colleagues have ready access and we can promote not just our HR policies, but all key aspects of council communication to all of our colleagues, including those who are in our frontline roles.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Clearly a very important area as evidenced by the questions and comments raised. So are there any other comments before we look at, oh, I beg your pardon. Peter, could I invite Peter Davis, Deputy Chief Executive, to comment, please?
Am I on now? Thank you, Chair. Just only a brief comment. If we just cast our minds back in terms of the Code of Corporate Governance, I think one of the asks of the committee was, I think yourself, Chair, was to ensure that, similarly to Councillor Neil's point, that we look to push suitable communication out and across the council workforce to ensure that there was that level of awareness and understanding of the code and its requirements. Pip doesn't need to necessarily come back in, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think with the code of conduct equally, I think that is being updated as well on similar timeline. And again, I'd probably take a similar sort of reflection there, that's an important update of a document that the whole workforce needs to be aware of. I think coupling in Councillor Neil's point with regards to whistleblowing, I think we can probably sensibly package these up into one broad communication. So I think that's probably what I would suggest we look to do at an appropriate time, unless for good reason the timelines don't correlate and they need to go by way of separate communications. But as long as we hit the core communication channels, of which we now have the benefit of Page Tiger as an additional one, we just need to be seen to be making reasonable endeavours to generate that level of awareness. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. If I could go to Phil Murphy next, please. Phil.
Okay. Just for clarification, Matt, you mentioned frontline people like carers and bin men and that sort of thing. QR codes around the building won't necessarily help them. So can you just harden up on how we're going to get the message out to people who may never come into County Hall? They might go into Raglan Depot. So you know what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. And so there can be a tendency for those of us that are based in County Hall, when we say building, to default to County Hall. That wasn't what I was doing in this instance, because a lot of the feedback we get is when we go out and around the depots. So you're talking about places like Raglan, so these things can be by the kettle, on the cupboards where the coffees are placed. It can be little sort of A5 or A4 handouts that supervisors pass on to people or leave where the drinks are. So absolutely, I wouldn't want to present that as a County Hall centric. It's actually those of us that are based in central buildings find these things easier because we tend to be on networks with access to laptops. This product overcomes that and gets it into the pockets of everyone that carries a smartphone with them.
Okay. So I'm not seeing any other hands up. Just to remind members, we're being asked to note the contents of this report and take a level of assurance over the effectiveness of whistleblowing practices as set out, noting that the policy is being redrafted and will be presented to this committee in due course. So I take it that members are content to note the contents of this report, in which case we'll move on. We're going to further rejig the agenda, as we have a number of colleagues here to talk to us in respect of item 13 being the annual report of freedom of information requests, DPA breaches, data subject access requests, I propose we take that item now. Thereafter, we'll go to item 12, which is the panel performance assessment report, to review that. So in the first instance, back to Freedom of Information Act, item 13, if I could ask Sian Hayward, our Head of Information Security and Technology, and her colleagues to introduce the paper, please. Over to you, Sian.
No, Sian, we can't hear you.
Hear me now?
Yes, loud and clear.
Lovely, that's what I wanted to hear. Okay, sorry that I'm having to present remotely today. My name is Sian Hayward, Head of Information Security and Technology, and I'm here to introduce the report on freedom of information, SARS, and data breaches. It's a fairly long report. It's got lots of figures and lots of explanations, so I won't go through it line by line with you. I will highlight a few points in the report, though, and then I've got my colleagues, Kath Evans and Anne Smith, who work in the service day in, day out, who may want to add some additional detail if you require them to do so. If I can take you to section 4, we've got the freedom of information section there. Now, Monmouthshire's performance in freedom of information is really good. Even though freedom of information requests are increasing in complexity and numbers, it's worth mentioning, though, that even though we've got good reports, that our internal reviews, which are where members of the public disagree with our decision making on the information that they have, or where perhaps we've been late in replying to them, those internal reviews are increasing. The majority of the internal reviews are resource intensive. They involve us speaking with people from the internal service areas. They involve a lot of meetings, and a lot of paperwork, and a lot of to and fro to get the internal reviews out. And once we get those internal reviews out, of course, members of the public then are able, if they still disagree with our decisions, to go to the Information Commissioner's office. We try and resolve everything informally if we can, but the internal reviews have increased over the last 4 years, from more than doubled, and they are resource intensive. We think it's possibly because a lot more people have more information on how to make a complaint, or they're using AI to request their internal reviews and provide more information to us on what exactly they want to get out of the service. So even though they're quite resource intensive and quite complex, we are fielding those really, really well. So we haven't got a particular problem with FOIs, but I just want to emphasize to members that we have got increasing numbers of FOIs. The increasing numbers of FOIs are mainly because there's more information out there in the public, they know their rights, and we are really, really good at actually making sure that our information is open, and we do monitor it very closely with the service areas to make sure that members of the public are actually getting what they're requesting. They have a right to this information, and as far as me and my team are concerned, we like to make sure that the members of the public get exactly what they're entitled to get. If I can take you on to section 5, just briefly on that one, that's the section on data protection breaches. You can see that we had 93 breaches in total. That may sound like an awful lot of breaches. 63% of those breaches are emails. And that, again, will make you think, oh my goodness, the authority is really bad at making data breaches with 63% of the breaches being emails. When you think of the volumes of information that's going back and forth with the council and all the many millions of emails that we have, if we're only talking about 59 emails which are potential breaches, it's a very, very low figure. We do encourage our employees to report breaches as well as members of the public, because we don't want a breach to be made worse if we do nothing about it. So we actively encourage all of our workforce to contact us, even if there's a suspicion of a breach that they may have made, just to make sure that we can nip it in the bud. And I think that's actually meaning that if we are having an increase in breaches, it's not necessarily because we are working any differently or we are very poor at what we do. It's because we are enabling people to feel safe to report back to us if they are having a breach. If you go into section 6 with SARS, as well as SARS increasing in numbers, they're also increasing in complexity. But what I'd like to point out too is the disproportionate amount of SARS requests from mainly government agencies over the last 4 years. The requests have increased from 11 to 191. And these SARS requests are every bit as complex and complicated as if they were from an individual member of the public. So that does considerably add to our workloads on the SARS front. I would ask members to ask us any questions you want to know, anything you want to know, and I'll either answer it myself or I'll refer back to Catherine Evans, who's sat in the back of the room, for her to give some additional information.
Okay, thank you, Sian. That was very helpful. You did cover a lot of information there. Could I just pick up on one of the final points you made? In respect of SARS, you talked about the increasing number of SAR requests coming from government agencies. Could you expand upon that point, please? So what information are they particularly requiring?
Right, okay. Let me have a little look at the government agencies here. Sorry, I'm reading through the report on my other screen. Data subject request. They're things like National Fraud Organisation, Rent Smart Wales, Home Office, immigration authorities and things like that, where they need to have more information than they used to have to know on individuals who are committing fraud or sort of coming into the country illegally. I can refer you to Kath Evans for a little bit more detail, but to be honest with you, as we don't actually deal with SARS as such, only for education in my team, she may not be able to add any sort of context into that question.
Okay, fine. Just check for Catherine whether she's able to provide any additional information. If not, that's fine. Which case, thank you. Let's go to members for their questions and comments. So in the first instance, let's go to Alistair, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you also, Shannon. It's always very interesting to see how we are performing in these areas. I just wanted to pick up, if I may, on the data breaches, and as much as anything, the potential vulnerabilities that we may have as an organisation to cyber attacks. I work in the NHS in the digital field, and we're very alive to the risks of cyber attacks. Last year, my numbers will be out of date on this, but last year there were approximately 2 million. It's an almost inconceivable number, but an almost 2 million ransomware attacks every day in the UK. And the 95% of these are through emails, phishing emails, spear phishing, all sorts of approaches that are taken to engage with members of a workforce for a large organization which is rich in data. And I'm conscious of about 2 years ago, we reduced the resource available to employ one role in the digital, I think it was in the digital protection field. We had some discussion about it at the time. And I'm just conscious of the potential lack of robustness that we have as an organization to a cyber attack if we are getting significant numbers of breaches, identified breaches of data through emails. The unidentified email breaches on other matters are a little concerning, to put it mildly, in the environment in which we operate. So just wondered if you could comment on that and anything more that we might need to consider doing as an organization in terms of ensuring that every member of the workforce understands the protocols around emails in terms of keeping the data that we as an organization hold secure.
Function which sits underneath me. Can you still hear me?
Yes. No.
Truly, the subject of another report that we are bringing to the Audit and Governance Committee next month in July, and it's a regular report that we bring every year. But that's the breaches that we're reporting in this report today are mainly for things like where somebody's perhaps inappropriately attached something to an email that they're sending out to somebody. So it's from internal out rather than data breaches that are as a result of a cyber incident. And we have a whole team of cyber security specialists that are working on Monmouthshire's information security. I can't go into too much detail on our cyber security arrangements in open committee because our we don't want anybody to know what our cybersecurity arrangements are, just in case we're inviting bad actors to come in and actually exploit any of our vulnerabilities there. But the report that we're bringing back to Audit and Governance Committee now in July is exempt from the public, so we can talk about that freely there. But rest assured that we have all the arrangements in place to avoid breaches due to cybersecurity fraud. It's inevitable that we are going to have a cyber attack. It's not an if or something that we can 100% say that it's never going to happen. It will happen, but we've got all of the mitigation activities and functions in place to stop that from happening from a cybersecurity point of view. Does that help?
Did you want to come back in, Alistair? I assume not, in which case we'll go to Peter Strong next, please. Fantastic. Okay. In which case we'll go to Rodri, please.
Thanks, Chair. It was a question around the mandatory data protection training. You mentioned that it's hoped that over the next few months, nearly all staff will have completed it. I just wondered how that uptake was going along, and also what the uptake on the face-to-face training options has been as well.
Could I ask for Kath to answer that question, because she's got the detail of that one?
Can you use that one?
There we are. So, Catherine Evans, Data Protection Officer, but I'm on Anne Smith's microphone for this moment. Yes, the training we moved on the 17th of April, we moved the training that we'd previously had across to the Thinky platform on a new platform there to make it more interactive, and we hoped more user-friendly for staff and maybe more memorable. Currently, I checked the stats on that. We're currently over 1,200 staff who've currently completed that within the last few weeks that we've launched it. And we've got a system on that now that if they haven't completed it, it will send out weekly reminders. It'll send out weekly reminders themselves, and then it will send out reminders to their managers to ensure that they can monitor whether staff have completed. So I'm able to chase in that way, which is great. With regards to the face-to-face training, I do that in a bespoke way, usually via service area. So, for example, I've met with all of the youth offended service. I've met with members of various parts of social services, social care, fostering, and in that way, then I can do we kind of call it like a level 2 training, if you will, following the mandatory training. So I can tailor what I do with those to that particular service. And then in that way, as is always the best with these sorts of trainings, they can ask questions about things that have happened during, their day-to-day work, things they've come across, and I'm able to help train them on those particular issues that they've come across. And of course, the best thing that comes from those is that they are able to put a face to a name. They know where I am should anything happens. I introduce the team, and they know how to get to us. And my point on that training is always, if anything happens, regardless of what it is, just let us know, and then we'll go from there. So that's the real benefit to face-to-face training. Thank you.
Come another question. It's okay. It does mention about having repeated internal reviews submitted by single inquirers. And I was just wondering, at what point does it become vexatious, and do you have to go down that route frequently?
Yes, if I can answer that one. There's quite a high bar on vexatious requests. We had 4 that we classed as vexatious requests last year. It's normally where people are being abusive, where they use bad language, where they're threatening, where they're sort of putting it to because they can, but it's not to actually get any information from us. So we tend not to use vexatious request categories if we can possibly help it. People are getting more and more aware of what their rights are, and some people are getting more and more angry with any public organisations, so they will tend to be on the increase from now on in, I think. And people are more able to use technology to be able to get at the organisations that they feel are not doing them a proper service. Does that answer your question?
Thank you. In which case, let's go to Phil, please.
Only a quick one. Sian, you picked up on AI and potentially that being part of the catalyst for an increase, although I think most categories are relatively consistent over the last 4 years, but there is a slight climb. People are going to use AI more and more. Do you think that that's going to lead us to a resource problem, or do you think the present team can handle it?
It's already leading to a resource problem, Councillor Murphy. I think that people are using AI to construct their freedom of information requests. They're using AI to construct their SARS requests because it gives them the same sort of wording, so we can recognise when somebody is using that AI to make those requests. So yes, that is going to cause us an increase in volumes or complexity, because they know exactly what they can request, and it goes on to pages, whereas previously perhaps people may have just made this a much more simple request. Equally, on the other side, when we're talking about AI, there's potential for us to use AI tools in the future, and we are sort of testing out some of these tools now to be able to collate all of the information that we need to feed out to people, to be able to scrape the information and data out of systems, to be able to put that data and information into public-facing websites, etc., so that we can signpost people to get that information. We can work with service areas so that we can use AI to package up the information that they have in their line of business systems and perhaps present it in a way that means that people don't have to make freedom of information requests. They'll always need to make SARS requests because that's their personal information, which is slightly different. With SARS, when people, if we were to use AI to collate all of the SARS information, and some of these SARS requests are absolutely enormous, it's a good tool to use, but we will always need to have that human eye to make sure that people's names or people's personal information are completely redacted out of those SARS requests. SARS requests are usually very sensitive information, so we wouldn't want somebody else's, like a birth mother's name, to slip through when you've got somebody in foster care or has been adopted or wherever it may be. So we have to be very, very careful and vigilant to make sure that we are redacting every bit of information we should be, whilst also keeping in the information that people need to have. So we can work both ways. It can increase our workload, and potentially it has the potential to decrease some of our labour and slog in providing answers to the requests.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that's been recognised. I was going to ask you about the potential use of AI by ourselves, but you've very adequately covered that. So thanks very much.
Thank you. Yeah. So if I may, you've referenced resource strain and the potential for that to increase in the future. Clearly, that's a matter this committee is quite very interested in. And, if indeed that strain becomes unmanageable, or indeed sort of adversely impacts the quality or timeliness of responses, I think this committee needs to be aware of it as soon as possible, please, so we can take a view as to how we can support you and the team to make sure that we're in a position to deal with those requests as effectively as possible. I'm not seeing any...
Absolutely, I'm very grateful for that.
Thank you, Sian. I'm not seeing any of your hands up, so to remind members, we're being asked to review the Council's arrangements in respect of matters outlined and to consider their adequacy and effectiveness. Given what we've heard, I think we can take a suitable level of comfort from the information provided. So could I thank Sian and the team for the diligent work you do. Thanks once again. Okay, if we could move on, please, to the next item. And as I signalled, the next item is labelled as item 12, which is a panel performance assessment report. And in particular, the draft response to recommendations of that panel performance. Could I hand over to Matt Gatehouse, the Chief Officer, People, Performance and Partnerships, to introduce the item. Over to you, Matt.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. So members of this committee will be at least have some knowledge of this process. You'll recall I brought a paper to you in the autumn, setting out the purpose, what was going to happen, and also the role of the committee in the panel performance assessment. But particularly, I think, for the benefit of those watching at home, and as a bit of a refresher for all of those present today, the panel performance assessment is a relatively new requirement placed on all local authorities in Wales. It came about as part of the Local Government and Elections Act 2021, which reframed the performance management arrangements and frameworks in place around Wales. Over a number of years, members have become familiar with part of that framework, the self-assessment process, which is something that we do ourselves once a year, bring through committees, and then take into full council each autumn. This year, that's taking place towards the end of September. The panel performance assessment requires us, once every electoral cycle, to appoint a panel of external peers to come in and take a look at the working arrangements of the council. Now, they do that with a couple of different lenses. One, and you'll see some of the detail of this set out in the cover report, is to answer some specific questions around the effectiveness of the authority, our governance arrangements. You see that in para 3.1 of the cover report. Are we exercising our functions effectively? Are we using resources economic efficiently and effectively? Terms, those of us that have been in this local government world are very familiar with. And do we have effective governance in place for securing those arrangements? The panel performance arrangements also require us to sort of set a scope for particular things which we would like the panel members to look at when they're on site. And again, you can see that within the cover report. I won't sort of read it out verbatim, but it's basically at para 3.4, which is how well are we structured as an organisation in order to achieve the things we want to achieve, the priorities set by council. What are the opportunities to develop our person-centred and preventative approaches? And finally, how well are we able to demonstrate impact and outcomes for communities and able to communicate that? So the panel members, again, are included in the report. It was chaired by Bev Smith. Bev is presently the chair of the Local Government Boundary Commission in England, but previously was chief exec of a number of local authorities in the East Midlands. So comes with a very high pedigree. And we also had quite a bit of, we had sort of experience from outside Wales as well in the shape of a gentleman called Chris Naylor, another former local authority chief exec, currently doing a lot of work with an organisation some may be familiar with called New Local, who are really well aligned with our own thinking. Now, over the course of the week, the panel met with a wide range of people. As you might expect, they met with strategic leadership team and cabinet. They met with scrutiny committee chairs. They met with a focus group of backbench councillors, with focus groups of older people, younger people, volunteers, local businesses. We had about 16 or 17 business leaders in to meet with them. And over the course of that week, they formed views. They triangulated those by speaking to others over the course of the week to arrive at a rounded assessment. And you'll see within the report, but it's one that I must admit I do like reading out, so I'm please indulge me. It's at, where are we, para 3.7, I think. So Monmouthshire is an ambitious, well-run council with communities at its heart and a reach that transcends boundaries. They went on to say elsewhere in the report, and I'm paraphrasing a little, but it's a good organisation with the potential to be great. And yes, of course, any of us, I think, attached to this organisation and to this county can take huge pride in that, and I certainly recognise it, the place I work, the place I have a huge affection for and spend such a lot of time. But equally, that reminds us we are not there yet. There is a lot more to be done to make sure we are the place and the organisation that we want to be, and that our communities and our colleagues deserve, and that you as elected members and individuals that put yourself forward to serve for this area, we all want to see that. So as part of the PPA report, they also made a number of recommendations, and again you'll see that within the cover report. And so I'm just scrolling to the right area to find those. I'll tell you what, are they in the cover report? No, we have an appendix with let me just take a step back. So one of the things we are required to do is they've produced 3 recommendations, and we have to produce a response to those recommendations. I'll come back to those in a minute. We produce some response. The role of this committee is to assure yourselves and to be confident that our response to that report is appropriate. It's going on to Council on the 25th of June for Council to approve that response, but the governance arrangements around this act and this responsibility give a formal role to Governance Audit Committee in that. What you see in the action plan is, it's not a detailed action plan, and what I would like to say as well, if you read through, and whether you've done it already or have the opportunity to later on, there are 3 specific recommendations, but there's a lot of other learning within that report. And although the formal response, as we need to do, addresses 3 formal recommendations, that doesn't mean we're ignoring everything else. So all of the learning in this report is being pulled out and will be embedded through all of our normal improvement and performance management arrangements to make sure that we don't leave one drop of potential learning or improvement on the pages of this report, but that we are acting on all of it. So briefly, Chair, and I'm sort of moving towards a conclusion on this. So the recommendation is sort of recommendation 1, prioritising major opportunities to deliver better outcomes for residents at lower cost. I'll just move through this quickly and then just say a little bit about the response. Secondly, to strengthen community resilience and shared understanding. And thirdly, to focus on workforce and succession planning. So just to say a few sort of points briefly about those before throwing it open for questions. Prioritising major opportunities. We know there are huge amounts of things that we need to be doing. We have in place, and this is something that I believe we have on the agenda of Councillor Neil's committee performance and overview for September, is the For Purpose On Purpose programme, which we're calling locally FPOP. That's a framework which gives us the arrangements and the governance structures to be able to prioritise and ensure that we are appropriately resourcing the key things we need to be doing as an organisation to make us fit for the future, to make sure that we are optimised to deliver all of the things which Council has set out in the community and corporate plan as the things we need to be taking forward and which we will continue to evolve. The second one is about strengthening community resilience and shared understanding. And one of the things the panel were phenomenally impressed by when they came in, actually, and was, I think, the passion that our communities had for their place and the social capital that existed in our communities and how willing people were to give their time and energy into Monmouthshire. So this is really saying, let's make sure, and as a council, we need to capitalise on that and use that to best effect and harness it. And it ties in with a piece of work which is already underway, led by Councillor Ian Chandler on Living Well, our Living Well or preventative strategy, which went into Cabinet last year. And there's a piece of work alongside this, which is an earlier stage of development, more aligned to our community development team, but very complementary, which is about harnessing that social capital and making sure we work with and alongside communities. The final recommendation, and luckily we still have Philippa Green, our head of HR, in the room if we need to explore this one in more detail a little later as well, is workforce planning. So we've got the other thing they said. You'd expect me to shout this from the rooftops as Chief Officer for People. They were incredibly impressed by our workforce and our colleagues. And I don't think I'm breaking any confidence in when Bev Smith, the chair of this panel, walked out of the room from some of those staff group focus groups, she was absolutely buzzing. she was just so impressed by the quality of workforce that we have. And that around workforce planning work is to make sure that we position ourselves to ensure that we have arrangements in place to make sure not only are we recruiting the workforce for the here and now, but we understand the skills and needs that those colleagues need in future to make sure we continue thriving and are looking to the future in terms of workforce development, workforce planning, and making sure we've got the colleagues in place to continue to deliver. So, Chair, I'm conscious I could talk all day about this, but you probably don't need me to, so I will pause at that point and pass back.
Thank you, Matt. Very helpful. A comment from me, and then a couple of more detailed comments and questions before I go to members. Overall, the assessment looks really, really positive. So from my perspective, a heartfelt well done to officers in particular, and of course elected members who were involved in this process. I think it painted the council in a very, very positive light. So excellent work. So you referenced quite rightly the 3 key recommendations. So from my reading of those, they look sensible, but maybe my first question is, did any of these recommendations come as a surprise to you, Matt? My second point then is that you've talked about FPOP, okay, and clearly you've pointed to that in the proposed action plan several times. So from this committee's perspective, I think we'd like to get a clearer sort of line of sight in terms of the current status of FPOP, its structure, how it's resourced, and of course its key deliverables. And I do note you've referenced that a discussion on FPOP is going to be Performance and Overview Committee in September. So I'll work with Alistair to agree a pragmatic way for us, this committee, to also understand that project more clearly. And then thirdly, we talked about community resilience. Could you say a few words for my benefit what you understand by the term community resilience, because it's not abundantly clear to me at this early stage. Thank you, Matt.
Thanks very much, Chair. If I can, I'll take those in reverse order and go to the community resilience point, because you're absolutely right. These terms can be used, either they can sort of seem like almost ethereal language that can drift away if you don't pin them down. And actually pinning them down and coming to a common understanding is one of the things we need to do. But equally, it's very important we do that and take that work with councillors and with local communities. And that piece of work is going to be led by Paul Sullivan, who many of you know as one of our heads of service and heads up the community development team. But if we think in sort of resilient communities as a number of things, and they won't be unfamiliar to you in individual sort of components. So thinking about sort of one of them would be community capacity. So actually, resilient communities means that there is capacity in community to do things. Not just things don't just happen in Monmouthshire because we do them as a local authority. Things happen in Monmouthshire because we have community groups that put that time and energy into things. And resilient communities is about making sure we support those networks. We don't get in the way because people know what they need to do, but we create the conditions in which that community capacity can grow and flourish. So, a few years, it's still there. We've had programs such as Be Community, which is a training program for volunteers to make sure that they have the skills and expertise to sustain community organisations. We don't need to do it for them, we just need to give them a bit of support. It can also be connected communities. That's something that's been integral in our approach to social care for some time, and it, again, is apparent in the Living Well strategy, whereby we don't want to suck people into statutory services where they can end up almost becoming attached to those services. No one has an aspiration for home care. No one has an aspiration for daycare. We have an aspiration to be connected to people in our communities, to our families, to have a purpose and to be busy. So that's about building these connections in communities. So when people have vulnerabilities, that they have needs for support, that can be met in their local communities And often we find in Monmouthshire, here that we might have a volunteer who somewhere else would be a service user. And actually, you know, a 90-year-old volunteer is far better than a 90-year-old service user, because that contribution from volunteering, that sense of worth and value they get, is far better than they would get from being bussed into a day centre and you know, playing bingo or having someone serve them a meal. So yeah, it's about that community capacity, that network, and building that strength in our communities to reduce the reliance on local authorities, so we can focus on the things that only we can do. If I go back then to the question about were any of them a surprise? No, I don't think so. If we think about it, you know, these recommendations came from their perceptions, but also the comments that were fed in by us, by yourselves, those of you who involved this over the course of the week. And yeah, if there were surprises, I'd be probably a bit concerned. But a good example, workforce planning, is something that myself and Pip had looked at before. It's been built into our people strategy as something we'd already committed to doing. But it's something that we deliberately programmed to a certain point of the people strategy because we needed to put a number of other building blocks in place. So I don't think there were any surprises. And just finally, that point on FPOP, yeah, I think it's absolutely right. We do need to do more to socialise that, to make sure it's something that's owned and understood by everyone in the organisation, but in particular members of this committee and councillors who need to use that framework, ensure they're aware to be able to hold to account and ensure it's been done and being implemented effectively.
Thank you, Matt. Very helpful. If I now go to members for their questions and comments. In the first instance, I'll go to Alistair, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Matt. And good to read the report. And indeed, congratulations to everybody who, over the course of a year and year in, year out, put in the work that results in other people coming in and saying how they see it. I think there's a great deal in that is very reassuring. We would be having a different conversation, obviously, if we weren't reading those words. However, I do want to focus on something that you yourself, Matt, were beginning to raise. Of the 3 recommendations, 2 of them really relate to community and delivering for residents. And it's that I really just want to home in on. It's incredibly important that if we have a report that says we're doing a lot of things well, that we do not come across as complacent about it. That's particularly true when we as councillors spend a lot of time with our communities, our community councils, and as councillors dealing with the organisation. And there are just innumerable points of frustration in how our communities, how our residents find dealing with the council really problematic. I have to say there are similarly extraordinary numbers of concerns that I hear, just as one councillor, about the failure of officers to reply to questions that are raised by councillors, and I hear the same thing from community councils. So there's a lot of frustration out there by our communities and our residents in the way that we engage with our residents, with our communities, and I've mentioned equally with our councillors. So it's incredibly important with that backdrop that we don't come across as an organisation that is sounding or capable of sounding complacent because we have a report like this. It doesn't address the points I've just mentioned to you. That may be partly because there are limited contacts, inevitably, of any group coming in. They're going to spend a limited number of days, and they're going to spend a limited number of meetings with groups and with communities. They had meetings with some community council members. They had meetings in the Abergavenny Town Hall with voluntary group, with business group. But it's far from getting a really true picture of what's going on across the county. It's always very difficult to get that. So we as a council need to be the organisation that is very self-aware of those points. So it really surprises me that, for example, in the report, in the top reports on the agenda, there doesn't appear to me to be any reference to these three significant recommendations. And that should be right up front there. And when it comes to council, I think you should draw attention to it. It's very important we do not come across as somehow unaware of the frustrations that our residents, our communities, and indeed many of our councillors have in dealing with the county council. Great that we seem to be doing a lot of things well, but there are a lot of things that we're not doing so well, and we need to register that. So please could we make sure that we do that in the covering report when it comes to council and to full council, and indeed to highlight right up front the three recommendations, and that they relate heavily to communities and residents. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks very much, Councillor Neil. And I think if I separate that into two key points, you're absolutely right. As I would expect, we'll make sure that those recommendations are front and centre when that comes into council later in the month. It certainly wasn't any attempt to hide them, and I sort of referenced them in my introduction, but we can certainly address that in the cover report for council. And again, absolutely right. And I hope that the committee felt it came across in my introduction that, well, this is a positive report, there's certainly nothing for complacency. And there's a lot for us to learn from. And, Councillor Neil, the point you make is absolutely right, that this was a team of 4 people with a couple of colleagues assisting from the WLGA, covering £250 million revenue organisation with 4,000 staff meeting the needs of 94,000 residents, that they're not going to be able to cover everything. What I would say is, well, they did draw on some other evidence as well. So we have our annual resident survey, so they use that as part of their feedback. They had our staff survey. But you are absolutely right. We've been working hard over the past few years to continually try and improve how we engage with communities, how we learn from communities. So the introduction, for example, of the Let's Talk platform and forum being one example to improve how we get feedback from residents. The introduction of the resident survey 2 years ago, which is led by a colleague to my left, Richard Jones, who manages our data insight function. We've run that for 2 years now, so it's another way in which we try and get that feedback from residents. But absolutely, Councillor Neil, hear what you say there. There is no room for complacency. And while some people have good experiences, we know there is still more that can be done, and not everyone has those good experiences. And we need to make sure we have more of those good stories, and we seek out where practice isn't what it should be and look to improve that. And that's what we will continue to do through our performance management arrangements.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. If we could go to Phil next, please.
Only a quick one, Matt. FPOP seems to be the panacea for all ills. But I note in the appendix it says a delivery plan for FPOP has been developed and is overseen by the Programme Assurance Board. So if you'd like to tell us who the Programme Assurance Board are and how often are they going to review the progress of FPOP? It's just so that people understand that, what that sentence means.
Yes, absolutely. I'm trying to think how many of the Programme Assurance Board are in this room. Right, there are 2 of us in this room. So all of strategic leadership team are invitees. The core members of the strategic leadership team that sit on the FPOP Programme Assurance Board are the Chief Exec, myself, and Peter Davis, our Deputy Chief Exec and Chief Officer for Resources. We also have Kath Fallon, who heads up the programme. We have Paul Sullivan, we have, and then standing invitees, all of the members of SLT. That board at the moment is as described, it's still in the early stages of the programme, and I expect those arrangements to transition. But at the moment, the board is meeting every 3 weeks to maintain momentum. We met immediately before this meeting, which is probably why myself and Peter Davis walked in with about 5 seconds to go. But that's something that will be kept under review and will sort of be discussed as the arrangements come forward for review by members in September.
And just for the avoidance of doubt, Jan Furtek, our Chief Internal Auditor, do you have a standing invite to those board meetings, please?
Yeah, so I can attend if I want to. I think at the moment I've made a conscious decision to step back from the board to allow that independence and that oversight if required later on in the day. So to let the board embed themselves first. But yeah, I believe if I wanted to attend, then there would be no objection from the board that I would rock up.
Good, thank you. In which case, let's go to Colin, please.
Thank you, Chair. So the 2021 legislation's got a lot to answer for, hasn't it? So in one way, it's seen as quite a light touch review, but by significant individuals. And reading through it, it seemed to be quite light touch and very complimentary. And then it was almost like a twist in the plot when we got to the recommendations. I didn't see those coming. There's a significant amount of work in the first two recommendations, acknowledgement in the third about workforce planning that work is significantly underway there. But there is a lot to do. And in the recommendations, they don't acknowledge things that are in place, which I presume you're going to come back with, that are in place that are answering or are in the process of answering some of those recommendations. So can you help me with that, Matt?
Yes, certainly. And probably one of the things it was remiss of me not to mention in the introduction is this is the report of the panel. The panel do have a limited amount of time to produce it. So they gave us feedback at the end of the week, just verbal feedback, and that went to SLT and Cabinet, as well as our performance team, Richard and Hannah. And then that was followed, I think, 15 or 20 working days later by the written report. Now, the way this is set out, when we work with Audit Wales, for example, and regulators, we get a copy of the report and there is an opportunity to comment on factual accuracy, but potentially also to push back and say, no, we also have X, Y, Z, you've missed this. There isn't that scope with this report. We can comment on factual accuracy. I think they spelt a name wrong. There were a couple of bits missing here and there that were sort of factually wrong. But we're not able to go back and say, actually, we think you've missed something quite significant here. Can you reflect on this or incorporate this? So it is a product of the way in which it's produced and the limited time that team have available. I know from talking to Bev, over the course of the week, and you get to know these individuals, and we didn't know them before, that the one night she was up till sort of 4 a.m. drafting chunks of it because they're trying to turn it around in incredibly quick. I think there are a lot of positives in that report. There are some important areas of learning, but what I wouldn't present it as is something that's had a lot of sub-editing and we could have put a lot more context in there with a bit more time.
Thanks.
Thank you. Let's go to Rodri next, please.
Thanks, Chair. I'm not sure if this is within our remit, so apologies if it isn't. But I was interested in the detailed scope of the assessment being determined by the Cabinet, and I was wondering, is that flexibility helpful, or does it hinder ambition in terms of the scope of the of what is looked at?
Yeah, I guess others may bring a different perspective to this. I think it's helpful to have the ability to give a little bit of flex, because then it's a framework that works for us as an organisation and as a place. So they have to do the bits around economy, efficiency, effectiveness. And bear in mind as well, this is not replacing anything that is already in place. Our self-assessment arrangements, all the work that comes in through this committee from Audit Wales, Estins, CIW over the course of the year, Charlotte, Steve, their colleagues down there. So all of that still takes place. This gives us a little bit of a scope to direct some of that capacity at the areas we think we would benefit from a view and a critique and some expertise from outside the organisation. And that's why in putting the panel together, we were also very keen to look beyond Wales, because we know Wales can be a little bit myopic. And there are 22 local authorities in Wales. We're a nation of 3-point-something million people. Are we going to get the best challenge, the inspiration by looking within those Welsh boundaries? So it was one of those opportunities where we could bring some people in from a little further afield. I think in terms of whether the approach is the right one, we're towards the end of the programme now, and WLGA will be producing a learning piece off the back of this, and when all 22 and associate partners feed in, it might be that some of this evolves. I wouldn't position it as perfect, but I think it feels like a positive element which has been added into the improvement landscape for Wales.
Thank you. Could I go back to Alistair, please?
For indulging me, it's really just to say that I think some residents and businesses might think we're losing our mind talking about FPOP every few minutes, and it would be really helpful to avoid acronyms, but also to just, as we have used FPOP multiple times, if Matt could just spell out for anybody who is hearing that what actually it means and what it entails.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Neil. Yeah, it's a very good point, and apologies sometimes when you're in a role like mine, you start to live and breathe things, and you can slip into shorthand, which I shouldn't have done. So FPOP stands for Purpose on Purpose. It's a change programme, and one of the things that we are doing at the moment through FPOP is looking at some of the significant change programs in place around the organisation, and also looking at some of the gaps that we may be needing to inject more capacity into. I said, are we effectively giving those the best chance of success? Do we need, well, if I just take a step back from that, let's look at the key measures and the things that will allow us to determine whether they are a success, the resources required to deliver those projects, and determine where we need to either adjust or to inject more capacity or different skills into those projects to give them the best chance of success. Because I guess, if I'm sort of speaking candidly, one of the dangers in a large organisation such as ours is you have a multiplicity of projects and programs being delivered, and people can be working away quite hard at those, but we're limited of resource, and people sometimes won't or don't feel there is the additional resource or skill base there to put their hand up and say, I need a bit of extra help, I need some support to push this on. So FPOP enables us to look at what projects need, to give them a push, and then to embed certain sort of principles in those ways of working to make sure that we are being consistent and look into the future. So, for example, are all of our programs and activities making the best use of digital technology? Are they utilizing their data effectively? So we have a number of sort of themes that run through this and allow us to give us a consistent lens into these programs to make sure that they're all optimized as best they can. And I know if I sort of look up to my fellow Programme Assurance Board member, Peter Davis, our Deputy Chief Exec, I just want to check, Peter, whether there's anything you sort of want to add into that to make sure we're appropriately conveying that for the benefit of those watching online.
Thanks, Matt. I think not too much to add, because I think that's quite a succinct, I think the report itself expands anyway further upon the point for the reader anyway. But I think the important thing for me is this doesn't look so. First off, just a point of amplification. So this is both a change and improvement programme. It is ensuring that we've got the conditions in place within the council to be successful moving forward. this doesn't look to replace the community and corporate plan, because that represents, I guess, the policy framework for the council, against which council officers are charged with delivering. But there will be natural points of connection there. And so I think it's entirely appropriate internally and from an officer perspective to be at leadership levels or otherwise to be asking those probing questions as to whether we get the capacity and capability in place, both to take a lens to existing programs of work, and there is a hard edge to this in terms of asking some fundamental questions as to whether there are potentially programs that are maybe not delivering of value as those projects and programs advance, and do we need to take decisions to stop? Do we need to adapt them in any way in order for them to more closely align as a collective, or in fact as to whether we need to double down on them because they are delivering added value benefit, and perhaps we need to inject additional capacity and resource to accelerate them. So I think that just is a natural supplement, a complementary feature, I think, of our wider governance architecture to ensure that we are delivering not just on all fronts, but in a very focused and prioritised manner. And you'll expect me finally to sort of say in my role, not so much as Deputy Chief Exec, but as Statutory Director for Resources, Section 151 Officer, that there is a very hard line here between FPOP and the medium-term financial strategy and its delivery. But to echo that it is not all about simply delivering savings. It is about delivering savings, yes, because we have a financial context to operate within, and we know we have to drive change to achieve that. But this is about equally delivering outcome and impact, which is at the forefront of it, which is what a policy and policy delivery is all about. Thanks.
Thank you. I don't think any of members wish to come in at this stage. So if I could just remind members, we've been asked to review the draft response to ensure that it is appropriate and to make any recommendations for changes. I'm not hearing any material concerns over the shape or structure of those proposed responses.
Thanks, Chair, and I'll just put Rich on notice that I may call him in a moment, because as you know, as a committee, our performance management arrangements are overseen by Richard. So there's a number of different ways I think that this will come in and you'll have oversight of this, but I do know that Richard will probably explain this far more articulately than I will.
Thanks, Matt. I think the primary oversight for the action plan will sit within our self-assessment process. Matt talked in his introduction about the alignment between obviously both the legislation but also the processes, how the panel performance assessment will inform our self-assessment process and was informed by it. Our intention is for the action plan now to feature within an explicit section within the self-assessment going forward. So on an annual basis, we will assess our progress against those recommendations, and that will be contained in the report that comes due usually around early summer. Alongside that, the more detailed actions will then fall into our regular performance management processes, particularly through service business plans. So where this particular service, Matt's talked about, for example, the workforce planning actions, they'll both sit within our enabling strategy and people strategy, but also then within the people services service business plan to be monitored through that, which will allow us to aggregate the report into the self-assessment process. So it'll very much become now embedded as our performance framework. We don't propose necessarily at this stage to do a specific separate report on those alone. We've talked about the other assurance processes coming in terms of FPOP, etc. as well today. But obviously we can take the committee's view on any further monitoring they may wish.
Thank you, Richard. I think I'm content with what you've set out, aside from if material exceptions occur to the proposed progress, this committee is informed of it as soon as practicable. Otherwise, I think members are content with the draft responses and content for it to go to council. So thank you one and all. If we could now move then, please, to item 7. Item 7 is the Internal Audit Annual Report for the year. If I could ask Jan Furtek, our Chief Internal Auditor, to introduce this item and possibly also segue into item 9, the Progress Report for Quarter 4. So over to you, Jan.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Here we go. Yeah, so as I agreed with committee at our pre-meet, so I'll take my two reports together today. So first, you take you through the findings from quarter 4 of the 25-26 financial year, moving on to the 25-26 internal audit annual report, before moving on to our rolling internal audit plan for quarter 2 of the current financial year. So first of all, thought it'd be useful just to quickly just remind committee members, members of the P&O Scrutiny Committee, and of course members of the public regarding the audit opinions that we currently use within the team. So they're based on the recommended audit opinions as issued by CIPFA, the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy. So there's 4 opinions or conclusions, 2 which are seen as positive, which are substantial and reasonable assurance, and then 2 unfavourable, which are limited and no assurance. When we come to an audit opinion, we do have a scientific method that sits behind the scenes, but basically it's the judgment of the auditor and then myself as the head of internal audit to come up with the audit conclusion. That depends on the risk that we find during the review, so we might find a number of issues within a review. They might have low risk and it still might get a substantial or a reasonable assurance opinion despite having a significant number of them. However, a review could have one single risk that we decide is significant enough to take it straight into a limited or no assurance category. So it is very much a balance and it is a judgment taken by the internal audit team. So during quarter 4 of the 25-26 financial year, we issued 14 audit conclusions, 2 substantial, 8 reasonable, 2 limited, and 1 no assurance. So they're detailed on the slide. So in terms of the unfavourable opinions, so the Caldecott Castle no assurance, we'll discuss that through a confidential paper towards the end of my presentation. Employee general expenses, so this was a follow-up review and it received limited assurance, so it's the second consecutive limited assurance for that review. On our audit testing, we found that only 4 of the 12 prior recommendations had been fully implemented and there were a number of key weaknesses that remained within the system. We didn't have the assurance that appropriate actions had been made to mitigate those risks, and there was at the conclusion of the review, there were still 7 significant issues outstanding, so it gained a second consecutive limited opinion. And then likewise, employee travel and mileage expenses. So again, that was another follow-up review. And again, there were 7 significant issues that remained unaddressed through that audit. So the plan is now we have now finalised both of those reports. We have got agreed management actions to the recommendations from the appropriate chief officers, and we'll follow up that review again in a 6 to 12 month time frame to ensure that appropriate actions have now been made for it. We've been given assurances from the chief officer that appropriate actions have already been started to be put in place, and a number of additional controls are being worked through currently. The other limited assurance review that we issued during quarter 4 was for King Henry VIII 3-19 school. So this was an unplanned reactive review based on the request of the Strategic Director for Children Learning Skills and something else. So the review identified a number of significant issues. There was 2 critical weaknesses identified, 25 significant and 18 moderate. So quite a significant number of issues. The headline figure was that this projected deficit was in excess of 2.2 million, or due to be in excess of 2.2 million by the 31st of March 26. And there was weaknesses within the deficit recovery and budget setting policies. There was also some non-compliance pay governance and other HR control weaknesses that were found within the review. So the actual list of the findings are included within the agenda pack. It must be noted that during our review, the testing of the school private fund was restricted because the 24-25 academic year records were off-site and that had not been returned to the school during our audit fieldwork period, although they should have been returned some months prior. There was also, to bring to the committee's attention, there was 2 matters identified during the audit review that remain currently under investigation, and they will be reported to this committee once those areas have been completed. So in terms of the moving on to the annual report, so in our year to date, or year to the end of the financial year, we issued 7 substantial audit opinions and 1 unqualified grant claim, 17 reasonable assurance, 6 limited assurance, and 1 no assurance. So I've previously reported the unfavourable opinions to committee. So to reiterate, they were health and safety building compliance, the My Mates team, deprivation of liberty safeguards, and then the 3 that I've just reported in. So employee mileage follow-up, employee general expenses follow-up, and King Henry School. So the report attaches my internal audit annual report. So that meets the requirements of the global internal audit standards and provides committee with an overall opinion on the internal controls operating within the county council and provides a summary of the work completed during the year. So that report is to be read in conjunction with my quarterly update reports provided to the Governance and Audit Committee throughout the year, which brings to the committee's attention the issues arising from my reviews. I can confirm that the internal audit team has completed its internal audit work for the year based on our operational audit plan approved by the committee in May 2025. The review included work on a sample basis of various different systems and establishments, and that would be sufficient to discharge the authority's responsibilities for internal audit under Section 151 of the Local Government Act and the Accounts and Audit Wales Regulations 2014. So the opinion is based solely on the work undertaken. So work was planned in order to provide sufficient evidence to give me reasonable assurance of the internal control environment. So overall, based on the planned work undertaken during the year, in my view, it is that the internal controls in operation give us reasonable assurance. So that means that there's generally a sound system of governance, risk management control in place. So that opinion does not imply that internal audit has reviewed all risks relating to the organisation, but have done our best endeavours to ensure that we have addressed those areas that we feel is necessary. So a further requirement of the global internal audit standards is that we complete follow-up internal audit work. So that's in line with Principle 15. So where an opinion had been issued that was unfavourable, we look to follow that audit up within a 6, normally a 12-month time frame. So this slide shows where we have followed those pieces of work up. So in quarter 4, we issued 3 positive opinions. So Mardy Park Residential, Facilities and Building Cleaning, and Caldecott School. So they've all received more favourable opinions. 2 reviews are currently under fieldwork. So that's Children's Looked After Savings and Procurement Cards. And we hope to report those to committee during my next update report. So in addition to reviewing the unfavourable opinions, we also look to ensure that all the recommendations issued during the previous financial year have been addressed. So during that previous year, we issued 122 recommendations. It's pleasing to report that 62% of those had been fully implemented, with a further 31% being partially implemented. So overall, 93% of our recommendations have either been fully or partially implemented. At the time the fieldwork was completed, there was 2 recommendations that were considered to be no longer relevant, and we've confirmed those reasons. And there were 6 that were considered not to be implemented. So we've obtained assurance from those service managers that appropriate action will be taken and controls put in place to address those issues. Overall, as I said, we've got 93% that our recommendations have been fully or partially completed. Just to confirm, the internal audit team continues to provide fraud response support and assistance across all service areas. So most referrals and discussions do not require any further action from us. However, a small number do require that additional investigation, and hence why we've got a counter fraud officer within our establishment. So during the year, the team were involved in 6 special investigations. High-level details of those investigations are included within the annual report, and I can confirm that referrals to safeguarding, HR for disciplinary action, and the police have been made where appropriate. Over the course of the year, the internal audit team have continued to develop the training module on the ThinkE e-learning system covering fraud, corruption and bribery. This is deemed to be mandatory training for all staff and members of the council, and as of the 29th of April, the completion rate was standing at 88%. So it's noted that completion rate does change throughout the years. Members of staff join and leave the organisation and can also be affected by those on long-term sick or long-term absence from work. So in terms of my Q2, so as agreed during committee earlier on in the year, we agreed to move towards a rolling internal audit plan where the plan is updated every quarter. So I'm now presenting to you Q2's rolling internal audit plan. So listed on the screen are the reviews that I'm proposing to audit during Q2, which is from July to September, sorry. So we've already started to get underway in a number of these, holding initial scoping meetings, and we are still completing our work for Q1, which will obviously be reported to committee during the next meeting. So the next bit is the confidential papers. So if committee agreed to go under confidential cover.
Yes, please do so. I don't think there's need to take a vote. There's been no objections raised with me, so please, let's do that.
So overall, the internal audit team completed 80% of their agreed plan against their target of 80%. Therefore, I ask that committee note the audit conclusions issued during Q4, that they consider to call in the Chief Officer for People, Performance and Partnerships for a future meeting to discuss the reasons for the second consecutive unfavourable opinions in relation to employee general expenses and employee mileage claims, to seek appropriate assurance that controls are implemented urgently. The committee note the section's performance indicators at the end of the financial year and endorse the internal audit annual report, and that committee approve the internal audit rolling plan covering Q2 of 26-27. And happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Please remind me of those recommendations in a few moments' time, but we'll go to members for questions or comments at this stage. Initially, Phil, please.
Thank you, Chair. No questions on your bit, Jan, but a comment, basically. I think everything seems to be going well, and I know you've had problems in the past, but they seem to be overcome. But in 5.3 of the report, you've got that schedule that you referred to of limited opinions. I agree with the chair that with the improvement in performance, the one with no assurance doesn't need to be called in. But from my point of view, I would like us to call in the appropriate people from King Henry as soon as is practical. And I'm quite sure the chair will pick up on that at the end of the discussion. But Chair, we do have Matt Gatehouse here, who will be overseeing at least two of the items, and I just wonder whether this would be an appropriate time for him to explain to us what he's doing to improve on the position of a limited assurance.
Thank you. Yes, Matt's already been teed up and he's eager and willing to give such an update. Over to you, Matt.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks for the opportunity, Councillor Murphy. And it's difficult being sat in this position. Earlier I was speaking to you about something that well, not perfect, felt like a positive piece of work, and as the responsible chief officer, it's incredibly disappointing. I would not want to be in this position, and I can assure you again that this is not something which we are complacent about. We have made some strides, not enough to move up the level of the audit. So compared to the last time, I was pleased that all of the critical weaknesses had been addressed and weren't there in the follow-up report. Nonetheless, I fully accept the findings of the Jan and his team, who did a very fair and thorough piece of work on this. There are a number of things we've done. So we've introduced a new policy framework, we've introduced new training and guidance for colleagues, and we've tightened up but not perfected our application of HMRC required sort of post check. So effectively what you do with mileage and expenses is conduct a sample check for 1 month every 6 months. What we weren't doing effectively, and I think probably, well, let me correct that. What we weren't doing was then going back where we found things and advising employees and correcting behaviours. That's now changed. The other thing which we have done is gone further than HMRC guidance, and we are for a period of time introducing immediate payroll checks on those expenses that come through. So rather than just looking to pick them up as sample checks after the event, we're actually introducing that check before those are paid. So already in place, the employee submits a claim. That has to be signed off by the manager. That has always been the case. And what we found was that things were being approved and being passed through to payroll when not all of those checks had been done. So managers may have been sampling check-in or may not have been looking closely enough, but things were coming through. So, you know, what that led to was things like appropriate receipts not being attached. So, and there were knock-on effects to that. So, for example, well, we just need to make sure that all of that appropriate paperwork is in place. So, Catherine Cameron, our head of payroll, is working with the team to introduce those additional checks, which we've spoken to Jan about, and will in the first instance introduce for a period of 8 weeks, and pushing those messages out to colleagues to make sure that people understand the consequences. And I will stress that I've issued a number of communications to managers and one to colleagues as well, making sure that people understand that it is their responsibility to check these claims, and that any erroneous claims which are made without the appropriate paperwork, you know, not just are they not being paid, but there are potential consequences for the employees if that happens. Everyone is capable of making a mistake once. We shouldn't be seeing the same mistake made by the same person or the same team twice. So we've introduced a number of changes. I wish I could sit here before you today saying this is perfect. There is more work to be done. There are also more things we can do, for example, capitalising on technology. So myself and Catherine this morning were with our software suppliers, trying to understand, and we set further meetings up, what they can do to make these checks easier. So, for example, as technology gets better, is it possible for artificial intelligence or some other tools to not only notice that, yes, they've ticked the box for a receipt, but to actually scan that receipt and say, you know, is there a VAT number on it? Which will make those checks a lot easier, because the last thing any of us want to be doing is have an employee put something in, a manager check it, payroll check it, and then sample checking after the event. If we can use technology to highlight and speed us up to where those problems exist, so we can focus on the major issues rather than having to sort of do multiple checks of every record. So we have an extensive action plan in place, which has been passed through to Jan and his colleagues, and as has been mentioned, there will be follow-up work in 6 months, and I will be doing everything I can to ensure that over the course of that time we embed all of the actions which are in that action plan, and that we return to them regularly to make sure that the appropriate compliance is being undertaken at all levels of the organisation.
Just a quick follow-up. Thanks for that, Matt. Question for Jan. Assuming that Matt is as successful as he hopes to be with all of that, would that automatically lead to a better assurance, or do you want to keep your powder dry?
I can't say that it will automatically lead to a better opinion, because obviously it does rely on individuals and employees and managers. So as Matt said, that for the next 6 to 8 weeks that the team are going to be doing this additional check-in. So for our point of view, we need to make sure that that's happened, but then that the managers then taken onus and taken ownership of that, and a sufficient period has been allowed for that to embed back in the system. So although over the next 6 weeks, in theory, people should be getting claims rejected, the question for us is, will that be embedded, and how is that looking in 6 to 12 months' time, when the onus is fully back on managers and fully back on staff to ensure that the claims are correct, and not just the gatekeeping done by the payroll team, which they will be doing at the moment.
Okay, thank you both for that. So the matter outstanding is, whilst we've had some very reassuring sort of comments from Matt, do committee members wish to formally call in Matt to a future meeting to take a deeper dive into the matters as outlined, or are they content to leave it for a period to see sort of what progress being made? Phil?
I think enough has been put in place to leave it until Jan gives us a further report.
Yeah, happy with that. unless there are any objections. Good. In which case, move on to Rodri then, please.
Thanks, Chair. It was regarding the mandatory training element of the report. I think when you compare it to last year's report, there's probably 32% increase in take-up, which is obviously really positive, and you can see some real jumps between completion rates across certain service areas. However, given that it is mandatory, I was wondering, is there anything else that could be done to increase take-up? We heard Sian Hayward, weren't you talking earlier about GDPR around those chaser emails, and then if people haven't completed it, then flagging up to line managers. And also, I noticed that members have gone from 29% completion last year to 39% this year. So is there anything that could be done in terms of working with political leaders to encourage completion as well?
Yeah, thank you, Rodri. So in terms of the system, so as Sian was saying earlier about the regular reminders, so that happens automatically through the system. So it's been noted as a mandatory training module, so those reminders should still be going out. Obviously, it's trying to make sure that everyone has done the training. Certain areas it's more difficult because they don't have as readily as access to the IT system as other employees do. So we need to work with them to making sure that they've got access. But it is, yes, trying to stay on top. We do report the stats in, so I have reported them through SLT previously to try and to make sure that SLT and senior managers get down on employees that haven't done that information. And in terms of members, that is an area that we do need to look at to pushing the training out a bit further, but also out at schools as well, and ensuring our school-based staff have equal opportunity to attend the training. Okay.
So back to a comment made by Jan several minutes ago. That was in respect of whether this committee wished to call in relevant people in respect of the King Henry School audit. What are members' views, please? Yep. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of nods of heads. So on that basis, we'd like to call in, I think, the head teacher and chair of governors of King Henry School, either to our next meeting in July or the one in September. If you could arrange that, please, Jan.
Yep, happy to arrange that.
Okay. If we go back to your recommendations then, firstly, in respect of your annual report, you're asking us to, once I get to the right page, to review, comment on and endorse the annual report as deemed appropriate. Given the discussion so far, I think we can endorse the report. So thank you to you, Jan, and the team for your hard work and diligence in sort of keeping us safe. As a byproduct, I note that the annual internal report of the Shared Resource Service will come to this committee meeting next month, and that will complement Jan's overall assessment. Then in respect of the second paper, I think we can note progress over the period in terms of the audits being completed. And then in respect of the proposed Q2 rolling plan, we're asked to note, comment on, and as appropriate, suggest amends to that plan. Do members have any comments on that plan in particular? Are they content with its structure? Okay. So I'm seeing lots of nods of heads. So we're content with the proposed plan for Q2. Yet again, thank you, Matt. Thank you, Jan. In which case, I think we can move on to item 9. Item 9 is the Treasury Outturn report for the last financial year. Could I welcome John Davis, Head of Finance, to this meeting, and also Daniel Francis. Thank you for your patience. So I don't know who's going to speak first. I'm guessing it's Dan. So I'll hand over to you to introduce the item. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you, Chair. This report represents the final Treasury Management update for the 25-26 financial year. It summarises the authority's borrowing investment activity, the economic context in which the decisions were taken, and performance against the approved Treasury Management strategy and potential indicators. All Treasury Management activities undertaken during the year were fully in line with the approved Treasury Management strategy, and all prudential indicators and limits were complied with across the period. This demonstrates the authorities continue to operate within the agreed risk appetite statutory framework. Turning briefly to the economic backdrop, conditions were relatively stable through much of the year. Moderate inflation and expectations of falling interest rates supporting markets. However, this changed towards the very end of the financial year. The escalation of conflict involving Iran in early 2026 introduced renewed volatility, driving oil and commodity prices and increasing uncertainty. This fed through into higher gilt yields and uptick in borrowing costs later in the year. So overall, while the year was broadly steady, it ended in a more challenging and uncertain environment. Against that backdrop, Treasury performance remained strong and prudent. The authority maintained a balanced approach to borrowing, ending the year with 197.6 million of debt and an average rate of 3.77%, while continuing to make appropriate use of internal borrowing to manage costs. On the investment side, performance has been positive, and externally managed pool fund investments have continued to perform well, generating an income return of 5.39% during the year, alongside an unrealised capital gain of 5.08%. These funds remain an important part of the authority's diversification strategy, providing stable income stream over the longer term. Members should note there's a current cumulative unrealised capital loss of 178,000 over the lifetime of these investments. This is down from 378,000 at this time last year. The statutory override related to pool fund gain and losses has been extended to the end of the 28-29 financial year for existing investments. This gives the authority over 2.5 years before any unrealised losses would need to be crystallised in the revenue account, providing sufficient time to manage the position prudently. In summary, despite a year that ended with increased geopolitical and economic uncertainty, the authority has delivered a strong and compliant Treasury outturn. Activities remained aligned to strategy, performance has been stable, and risk has been managed appropriately. I'll pause there and welcome any questions or comments members may have. Thank you.
So thank you, Dan. Lots of information there, and overall seems to be a good performance, especially given volatile markets over the year, not just the Iran war, but other matters as well early in the year, which did cause some financial institutions some issues. Okay, before going to members, just one relatively minor point from me. If I could draw attention to paragraph 6.4, where you reference a reduction in NBV of a couple of million, so circa 10%, I think, of total value. What's the expectation for the valuation at the end of March 26? Are we expecting that NBV to improve or not?
Yeah, these assets have been revalued, but at the time of the report being published, the figures weren't available. There has been an increase in the value across the assets due to sort of lack of, the reduction in rent-free periods that were considered in last year's revaluation, occupancy rate. Not significant values increased, but they have increased across all three assets.
Okay, that's positive. Excellent. Could I go to members for their questions or reflections, please? Phil.
Only a quick one, just picking up on 8.1, and particularly Castlegate. I know we've had a reduction in rent-free periods, but could you just give us a little bit more on Castlegate currently? I know it's there's an awful lot of work going on to fill the voids there and to generally improve its performance, but it seems to be dragging on a bit now with a minus figure. Wouldn't it be lovely, even if it doesn't get to 2%, to see that minus disappear? So a bit more information, but current information, please.
Okay. I wonder whether John Davis, our head of finance, wishes to respond to that point. So, John, over to you.
Can't hear you.
You're on mute, John.
Sorry, John, we can't hear you.
Try again, John.
Yeah, John, do you want to just try leaving the meeting and rejoining? Sometimes that helps. I don't know why.
You happy for me to come in, Chair?
Of course.
Whilst John is reconnecting, just to respond to the question, probably useful just to refer the committee to the fact that there was a commercial investment update that was presented to P&O scrutiny back in April, I guess, which provided full level of detail, I guess, in terms of the current status of the investment portfolio, including Castlegate, Newport Leisure Park, and our wider portfolio. I think Phil's right to highlight, obviously, some of the challenges that we faced with Castlegate in terms of occupancy. We are currently working with a significant tenant within Castlegate at the minute in terms of relocating them and freeing up, as a result, some of the more marketable space within the building. The report that went to Scrutiny Committee also referred to ongoing discussions with Cardiff Capital Region, given the sectoral links and opportunities that arise for Castlegate and given some of the existing tenancy that is there. And in fact, we're just scheduling to meet with them again in either tomorrow or Monday. Dates are just being firmed up. Nick is obviously working with agents continually, just in terms of being able to convert, I guess, leads and interests, of which we do have a number, into sort of tangible leads, and that will in turn turn into tenancies. That's probably the sort of the broad update as things stand at the minute. And just to sort of highlight with Newport Leisure Park, it's probably worth just noting of the solitary one vacant unit that we've got at the moment, we have agreed heads of terms with a new tenant to occupy there, which would then actually take Newport Leisure Park into a position of actually having full occupancy. So thanks.
Happy. Okay. Any other questions or comments, please? No, in which case we can note the report. In particular, we take comfort in the fact that over the period, we've complied with the Treasury limits and prudential indicators. So all in all, a very positive picture. Well done all. Okay, in which case let's move on to item 11. Item 11 is the annual effectiveness review of our strategic risk management framework. If I could ask Richard Jones, our Performance and Data Insight Manager, to introduce the paper, please. Over to you, Richard.
Yeah, thank you, Jay. Good afternoon, everyone. So you say this is our regular 6-monthly report to you on the assessment of effectiveness of the risk management arrangements, and also to provide you with an overview of the current risks facing authority on our strategic risk register. It's now been 2 years since we updated our strategic risk management policy. As I'm sure this committee will recall, your feedback was integral in both the shape, design and subsequent continuing assurance of that policy. Its primary aim was to strengthen our risk management arrangements, and I'm pleased to say, and hopefully you'll see supported by the report, that those arrangements are continuing to be strengthened. I'll perhaps take this opportunity just to highlight some of the changes we've now implemented and embedded in our arrangements, and also importantly how they're helping us in terms of strengthening our strategic risk management process. So we've updated the structure of our strategic risk register. You can see this summarised in the appendix. This includes the addition of risk categories, risk appetite levels, treat tolerate categories, and also target risk scores. This is supporting us to improve our assessment of risk, and also in our identification and mitigating actions to treat or otherwise the risk. We have developed a risk radar. A summary of this is in Appendix 4. That's helping us outline some of the potential risks that may affect Monmouthshire over the coming years, and support us then where we need to identify those either within our strategic risk register or to keep an eye on them in terms of any future risks or mitigating actions we may need to take. We've also defined a risk appetite for the council and using a risk appetite range for various categories of risk based on our different organisational activity. And again, this is supporting us in how we assess risk within our wider council decision making. We've implemented directorate risk registers. If you recall, we previously had one strategic risk register to around 50 service business plans. Directorate risk registers, 6 of them between that, allow us to more effectively both escalate and de-escalate risks between both service, directorate and our strategic risk register level. And finally, we've also strengthened the integration of other related corporate risk management arrangements. So things such as emergency planning, health and safety, insurance, finance, internal audit. And as you'll see within Appendix 2, we provided the latest update of progress with actions identified roughly 12 months ago since the last report to you, in the progress in implementing improvements to those arrangements. And again, integrating greater integration between those arrangements is supporting us to more effectively manage risks between them. So I think it's important to recognise the progress we made. Hopefully for you as a committee, it demonstrates not just the progress, but how it's supporting effectiveness in the risk management process. There remain areas we've identified to develop. We've talked about a couple of these in the most recent sort of overview performance management report I brought to you. So they are, director risk registers, whilst in place, are still relatively new parts of the process. We aim to further develop them, both in terms of their rigour, but also in terms of their use, to ensure that they support as much as possible risk management, both identification and mitigation in the organisation. And we also need to continue to ensure there's consistency in the application of the risk management across our organisation. As I mentioned, and we've talked about before, we've got a fair level of compliance in terms of completion and update to service business plans, for example, but we know those areas definitely need to improve, but it's not just improving in terms of completion, it's improvement in terms of quality. So one of those areas we particularly target is the development suite of performance management training, which we're on target to implement by the end of this month to support the rollout of our new service business plan process. And again, that's about incrementally improving and supporting our workforce, who all have varying levels of responsibility to manage risk, to strengthen both their awareness skills and application of our risk management process. So those are our primary areas of development. And finally, in the report, you'll see an overview of the current strategic risks facing the organisation. We continue to operate within a dynamic environment, and the strategic risk register is regularly evolving and adapting in line with that environment. There's been a couple of more significant changes since the last time we brought the overview to you as a committee in November. There's been an addition of one new risk 6, related to the possible risk of disruption to the global supply chain, including the supply of fuel, impacting the council's ability to deliver key services and projects. And there's also been a re-escalation of one risk, risk 14, related to the risks around the potential cost of living increases, and that tipping into families into crisis requiring more public service interventions. As ever, some of those issues are particularly live and evolving and changing at the moment, and we continue to keep the risk environment under review, and we'll update and review both the level and nature of strategic risks as needed, but also any further mitigation actions that may or may not be required as a result of how those may evolve. So that hopefully gives you a summary, Chair, of where we are with our risk arrangements, and I'm happy to take any questions. I should add, Hannah Carter has obviously played a key part in developing this report. Is on leave today, so I'll put on record my thanks to Hannah for collating most of the report.
Thank you, Richard. So very comprehensive, and indeed you've painted a very positive picture, which sort of resonates with my understanding in terms of what progress we've made. Before going to members, I'm very pleased you referenced the new Risk 6, because certainly front of mind for lots of organisations at the moment. And I'm sure, that's just for the avoidance of doubt, that's in respect of the impacts arising from the Iran war. Yeah, clearly, every organisation is being impacted by these developments in different ways. And I'm sure the impacts on Monmouthshire County Council are multifaceted and could be potentially significant. So my initial question, I suppose, in this regard, given the multifaceted nature of this risk, are members being regularly informed in terms of the impacts and how those impacts are being managed, please, Richard?
So I don't know if colleagues and Peter may want to come in on that as a risk owner related to the new risk 6 on the risk register.
I was paying attention, honest. Could you just repeat the question, sorry?
Yes, of course. In respect of the new risk on the register, in respect of the Iran war, I was suggesting that the risks is multifaceted and potentially significant, and you and the senior team are keeping close eye on developments and keeping elected members informed in terms of how this could play out. And I just wondered whether you're able to provide the committee some assurances that you are, ensuring that you're keeping a close eye on it and you're doing impact analysis as appropriate to enable elected members in particular to understand how this could impact the delivery of council services.
Thank you. That's really helpful. It's multifaceted. I think if I just talk to finance, the finance element first off, so that will naturally be picked up through budget monitoring as we move our way through the year. That there is a lag, particularly, but more so, I guess, in terms of the inflationary element of it, that will be picked up through that as a starter. So that is one element of it. I guess in terms of the supply chain risk, the supply risk element, that is a feature that gets caught both by arrangements that are across Wales, the Gwent LRF, and our emergency sort of planning sort of side, and the WLJ are also involved, as is Welsh Government, in just terms of keeping on top of that, and also in terms of sharing information and intelligence, which is continuing to be built. So that, I guess, in a strategic sense, both politically and off a senior leadership level, that we're abreast of how that emerging risk is crystallising itself. Further to that, I don't have the detail to hand in terms of the specific dates, but relevant officers are being brought together in order to actually understand at a service level how they themselves are starting to see some of this risk manifest, but also for them to be consciously aware, I guess, of the intel share that I've just talked to. It will naturally feature as a topic of conversation at SLT with the strategic leadership team as much as it will in our weekly touch points with Cabinet, in business Cabinet meetings. So I guess I think it's probably just slightly more than just a watching brief. We are naturally being proactive in terms of capturing and gathering intelligence that is being shared through those channels, both internally, but from the networks that I've referred to, and reacting accordingly. And if there is a service or a financial consequence to that, then we need to we're best understanding in our good preparations ahead of time, so that we can put arrangements in place, or in fact, as I started out on the input, dealing with the potential consequence of it, if that is a financial and budgetary one.
Thank you, Peter. Okay, if we could move to members for their questions or comments. Start with Rodri, please.
Thanks, Chair. In the appendix, you repeatedly mention about, I think it's 3 times, about the training course, the management training course. The completion date is June. Is it completed, and what's the plan for rollout?
Yeah, so when we write the report in May and it comes through in June, it still feels a long way off. But it's a good question. So yeah, our intention is to roll it out by June. As I mentioned before, it's not just risk management, it's also part of our wider performance management suite that we're aiming to have in place by the start of Q1 when managers are updating their service business plan. So that is on track at the moment at the start of June, but it will be rolled out.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments, please, from members? No? Good. So thank you, Richard, and of course, Hannah, for the paper and the work you do in the background. Much appreciated. So we can take the relevant assurances over the effectiveness of the Council's risk management arrangements. Could move on then, please, to item 14. Item 14 is our work plan for the committee. So I'm content with noting the minor tweak to the agenda for our next meeting in July, which is the inclusion of the SRS annual audit report, which I mentioned before. Item 15 is for us to review and approve the minutes of a previous meeting. Can I thank Nick for drafting minutes? I'm content with them. So unless members have any sort of comments, I'm going to assume they are approved. And finally, just for us to note the date of next meeting. Our next meeting is on the 23rd of July 2026. With that, I think that concludes the business of this committee, and may I thank members and officers for their contributions during the course of this meeting. Thank you one and all.